I'll actually post that video so you guys can take a look at it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the legislative elite. And a lot of these senators and members of Congress will have a personal entrepreneurship. And usually the members are drawn from people that are normally, an upper middle class and upper class status. And, they tend to be well educated and come from very affluent families and have very, diverse backgrounds. One thing that is in common, a lot of people from Congress come from the area of law. So, I always like to say it's interesting to, kind of figure out the reasons why members of Congress tend to become, lawyers tend to become members of Congress. And that, usually they know how to work the law and they know how to maybe circumvent the law. Most of these members are going to be career politicians, meaning, they really never had a job outside of Congress. A lot of candidates will recruit themselves. And like I mentioned, the professional background lawyers will dominate Congress. And if you look at any type of members of Congress, they'll have, some type of legal background. Generally, race and gender, European American males have historically dominated Congress, though, most recently women and other minorities have made inroads. And if you look at, kind of some of the members of Congress now, we're starting to see a much more diverse background. Right now we have 56 African Americans in the House, 3 in the Senate. Latinx, we have 35 members in the House, 6 in the Senate. 13 Asian Americans serve in the House, 2 in the Senate. And as of 2021, we have 142 women that are in the House and the Senate. And, if we want to look at Congress truly representing what, the demographics of the United States, that number of women might be a little bit low, since women are about 53% of the population. We have 535 members of Congress, so that might be a little bit low. Another thing that I think is kind of concerning is the mean age in Congress, which is currently 57 years old. We have the young ones like Madison Cawthorn and AOC, people that are below 30. But, with that, kind of the opposite is we have older members of Congress that might not be totally in touch with what modern society acts as today. If we look at party numbers, we have in the House, we have 219 Democrats, including 4 delegates. Remember that here in Congress, our territories will be represented, but they won't be able to vote. So territories like Guam or Puerto Rico or America's Samoa, they all have representation in Congress, but they don't have voting power. So we have 219 Democrats, and then we include 4 non-voting members, which are delegates. 211 Republicans, including 1 delegate from America's Samoa and the commissioner of Puerto Rico, and currently there are 5 vacant seats. In the Senate, we have 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats, and 2 independents. These 2 independents tend to caucus more with the Democrats, so we can, in a sense, say there's a 50-50 split in Congress. And when you have a 50-50 split in Congress, generally, if there's a vote that is tied, the vice president will break that tie. So you can basically say that the Democrats run Congress right now. So the Democrats are in control of the House and in control of the Senate. And next year, when we have our midterm elections, it's going to be interesting to see if these numbers change. Party control kind of, fluctuates between the Republicans and Democrats throughout, kind of this part of our history. From 1933 to 1994, the House of Representatives were controlled by the Democrats, right? And almost every year had a majority in the Senate. But recently, we've seen in the past maybe 20 to 30 years, party control of the House and Senate has switched back and forth almost every election in the 21st century. And like I said, we're going to have a midterm election in 2022, and it's going to be interesting to see if the Republicans can take back the House and take back the Senate. It wouldn't be surprising if they do, because kind of, generally what happens during midterm elections is sometimes if a president comes in with a majority in the House and the Senate, they tend to lose it. It's just, people, like we talked in voting, people vote retrospectively. And sometimes it can be an indictment on the president and, kind of that moderate voter not agreeing with what the president is doing. So there's a lot of times that we see, the control over the House and the Senate switch back. And, this is probably one of the most divided governments that we've ever seen in our history. There's really no room for compromise. And, this partisanship has kind of created a barrier where sometimes things can't get done. If we look at the personal wealth of Congress, that's well above the average citizen. So the average personal wealth of a House of Representative member is about $900,000, and in the Senate, it's about $2.8 million. It's interesting to take a look. If you take a look at the Open Secrets website that we've been talking about, they kind of dictate, or they kind of show who has what type of money you have to disclose your finances. And, a lot of these members in the House and the Senate become wealthier as part of, their job. And, whether it's speaking tours or writing books, it's just really interesting to kind of figure out why that somebody's wealth goes up when they join the House of Representatives or the Senate. And here's a link. You can look at the 10 wealthiest members of Congress. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys do that on your own. And on the inverse, look at the 10 poorest members of Congress, because there's people that are operating kind of in debt. And, that's kind of not surprising, because most of us here in the United States have some type of debt, so I wouldn't be too concerned about it. When we talk about whom Congress really represents, there's a lot of, passivity and a lot of some type of trying to look at the way kind of inaction that people take, kind of shutting things out. 59% of citizens can name one senator from both states, and 25 can name both. So let me say that again. 59% of citizens can only name one senator from their state, and 25% can name both. 29% of the general public can name their representative. And, that's one of the things that I want you guys to know, who your representative in Congress is. So go ahead and go to Congress and type in your zip code and on their website, and they'll be able to tell you who your representative is if you don't know. A lot of these representatives and senators will kind of represent certain industries that are part of their constituents. So here in California, a good example is, we pretty much have every type of, industry here in California, whether it's tourism or defense, military, agriculture, gas and oil. But if we look at other parts of the country, a lot of members of Congress will represent their home districts and the industries that they represent. And you could see, in New England, we have insurance and real estate, lumber and fishing. Down the middle of the country, we have agricultural districts. In the Southwest, we have oil and ranchers. And in the mountain states, we have tourism and mining. So the representatives and senators who come from those areas are going to represent that interest. And we also have instances where, activities will happen with senators or representatives in promoting their image among constituents and trying to look good. They do casework. So say, for instance, you have some type of issue, we'll say with the VA, the Veterans Administration. One thing that you might be able to do to get this taken care of is asking your member of Congress to step in for you. And what that is, that's considered casework. So say, for instance, I'm having some type of trouble with my VA benefits. You can contact your member of Congress and they might help you with that, right? Kind of trying to appease or trying to help members of the constituents that live in the congressperson or the senator's district. There's also instances where pork might happen. And pork is the appropriation of government spending for localized projects secured slowly or primarily to bring money to a representative district. So say, for instance, I was representing the area of Chula Vista that I live in, and I was attempting to get another military base built here. That would bring jobs, that would bring tax revenue to my area, and I'm trying to add this stuff to make myself look good and bring money to my district. There's also stuff like earmarks, where we have direct funds to a specific recipient while, kind of circumventing the merit-based or competitive fund allocation process. Basically what that means is you can at times get a direct government contract as opposed to having to go out and compete with other maybe businesses to get that government contract. So I used to work for the county of San Diego before I started doing this. And, if you wanted to get a contract between the government and the county of San Diego and some type of contractor, you would need to solicit 3 or 4 bids, and you would go with the most competitive bid. in this earmark situation, there's already somebody that's selected, and each year when the congressional budget comes out, funds for that program are already going to be earmarked for that specific. So there's really no kind of a competitive, who could we get to do the job for less type situation in some of these processes that we have in Congress. Fundraising also is involved, going out and getting people to donate money for your campaign. Now, there is some look at Congress where we think that maybe we should institute some type of term limit. Congress is the only office that does not have term limits here in the United States. The president does, if we go to local elections, the mayor, city council, they all have term limits, right? But when we talk about this through a representative democracy, if we're not happy with our incumbent, or if we're not happy with the person that is currently representing us, we could always have the ability to vote them out. But it doesn't happen often. Look at this figure. Only about 90% of House members and over 75% of senators will seek re-election, and they will succeed. So, it's kind of a situation where we have the ability to vote people out if we don't think they're doing a good job. But if you're an incumbent, that means you're already in office. 90% of the times you'll win a House race, and over 75% of the time you'll win a Senate race. So there's really no way that we might be able to vote people out, because as voters, we may not approve of Congress as a whole, but we generally like our representative. And that's kind of, the situation that we get into when we talk about term limits. These incumbents will have an advantage. People will know their name. They have the resources of their office to run their re-election campaigns. They have resources such as, franking, which allows members of Congress and their staff to send mail to constituents or supporters without having to pay postage. They use the old Congressional post office. They can earmark, and they can have heavy campaign contributions. So they definitely have an advantage because they're incumbents. And remember, they win 90% of the time in the House and 75% of the time in the Senate. And it kind of begs the question where we think, should we have term limits, and what are the pros and cons? If we talk about pros, we can actually say that maybe, term limits would increase competition in the electoral system and encourage more people to seek office. Opponents of this would basically say that, we're infringing on freedom of choice. What happens if we have a member of Congress that we like, right? And, we kind of go in that pluralist theory that if we're unhappy with our incumbents, we can generally vote them out, but it doesn't really happen that often. And also, we institute term limits. Sometimes that'll reduce the overall experience level of lawmakers, and also they can get prevented from, being put on more prestigious committees if we have term limits. And we'll explain this in a little bit. So let's look at the legislative process, right? I have it laid out. Here are the standing committees in Congress. We'll even go and look at a really good synopsis of the committees. So you can look at all these committees. These committees kind of act as the gatekeeper of legislation in the Congress. So if I have a question and I try to pass a bill that is regarding Homeland Security, it's going to go through the Homeland Security committee first, and we'll explain that in a little bit. So let's actually take a look at this little graphic that I have posted. Let me bring it up. When we talk about the legislative process, and we try to make a bill become a law. And generally, a bill will start with an idea. So a community member or a member of Congress will have an idea, and they introduce it to Congress. So say, for instance, we're going to use the Homeland Security idea. Say that we want to cut off all immigration, period. No immigration to the United States. And we want to pass a bill for that. Say we're going to start it in the House of Representatives first, right? So a member of Congress, and only a member of Congress, can introduce a bill. The president can't introduce a bill. The Supreme Court can't introduce a bill. A member of Congress has to introduce a bill. So they introduce that bill and say that, that immigration policy that we're trying to put into effect, it goes to the committee that represents the Department of Homeland Security, and the committee in House of Representatives that deals with Homeland Security issues. So say, for instance, these committees usually are composed of anywhere from 15 to 30 people, and they kind of act as the gatekeeper on legislation. So say, for instance, a majority of committee wants us to advance that bill, and they vote for us to advance that bill, and a majority of members of the committee want to pass that bill. So the next step would be that bill would go to a floor vote and a floor debate. So the floor debate will have instances where members of Congress argue against or for that bill. If there's any type of change to that bill, and most of your amendments are going to be, or most of these changes are going to be in this process right here. So what will happen is if there's an amendment to that bill, then the committee has to reauthorize that. If it ends debate and the bill is passed, then it goes to the Senate. If the bill is voted down, then the bill dies, right? But if the bill is voted in the affirmative, then it goes to the Senate. The same thing and the same exact bill has to be offered in the Senate. So it'll go to the Committee on Homeland Security. If there is a majority vote to advance that bill, then the bill will go on. If they deny it, then the bill dies. So if we get a majority of people that want to pass that bill, then it'll be advanced. If you can't get a majority or a 51% vote in that committee, then the bill dies. After that, it'll go to a debate on the floor. There's something that, that's been in the news called the filibuster, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in order to stop debate, there has to be something called cloture. So you need a certain number of senators. Generally, it's 60. In some instances, it's 51. If you have 60 senators that agree to close the debate, then you will have a floor vote. If you can't get 60 senators to close the debate, then the bill dies. And when I say close the debate, there is a certain time period that is given for the senators to argue a bill. If that time period has extended has expired and debate hasn't stopped, then the bill will die. So once everybody argues and there is cloture invoked, then it'll go to a floor vote. If you get a majority, then the bill goes to the president, who can either sign it or veto it. I know you guys know the separation of powers and how this is a check on the government. On the legislative branch, the executive branch has the check and the power to veto a bill by Congress. If the president signs it, it goes into law. If the president vetoes it, the bill dies. Congress can obviously override the president's veto with a 2/3 vote, but that doesn't happen often. All right? So remember, a bill can start in either the House or the Senate. I'm going to preface this by saying there is one instance where a bill has to start in the House, and that is bills dealing with revenue. So revenue bills have to start in the House. But any other type of bill can start in the House or the Senate, and the bills that are passed have to be exactly the same. There can't be any differences. If there is disagreement between the Senate and the House, then we can have a joint committee that is made up of members where they can hammer out their differences. Okay, so let's kind of go take a look back at, we looked at the committees. We saw actually a little bit better. In these committees, a lot of these committee assignments are based on seniority. So this is one of the reasons that term limits might not be a good idea. The longer you've been in Congress, the more likely you are to be put on one of the more prestigious committees, whether it's a finance or appropriations or something dealing with money. And if we have term limits, sometimes that can limit the amount of influence our senators or our representatives might have in some type of important bill. The chair of the committee will determine what bills to be considered. So we talked a little bit about that, and they established the agenda. The House Rules Committee is one of the more powerful committees in Congress, and they can easily kill a bill by not even addressing it. So just because a member of Congress introduces a bill doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be heard. if the committee decides that it's not worthy to be advanced, then they can just shelve it, killing that bill. Now, there's instances where we have something in the Senate, and this is the Senate only, where we have a filibuster. And this is where the Senate Rules Committee will put a number of a time limit on debate. So say, for instance, we have a bill that we're going to do debate for 3 days, right? If debate hasn't ended on that third day, then the bill dies, because we need to be able to invoke cloture to stop debate. So if you have 60 senators to agree to stop the debate, then cloture has been invoked. And then you can advance it to a vote, a floor vote. There's instances where you have people that, as kind of a show, are a kind of a grandstanding thing. They'll filibuster something, meaning that they'll talk and talk and talk, trying to reach that time limit that Congress, or that the Senate Rules Committee has put on debate. So if they're not done talking by the end of the time that the time set expires, then the bill dies, right? In order to vote cloture for a presidential nominee, including cabinet members and Supreme Court nominees, you only need 51 senators to invoke cloture. So that's why we kind of heard the filibuster's been in the news lately. A lot of people think 51 is the most important number in Congress. It's actually 60 at the Senate level, because you need 60 votes to invoke cloture. There's a video about the history of the filibuster that is attached in this module, so go ahead and take a look at that. And you remember, I also just mentioned when we went through Congress and looked at some of the things that they do as far as, passing a bill. Remember, we have the floor vote and the debate. This is where most of your amendments or your changes to bills are going to be made, right, in both the House and the Senate. Currently, the Democrats are trying to do away with the filibuster. It is a Senate rule and not mentioned in the Constitution. So let's look at the America Rescue Plan Act of 2021, or H.R. 1319, House of Representatives Bill 1319. This is the stimulus package that Biden put out in February of this year, where a bill was introduced to invoke the stimulus package. It was sent to the House Budget Committee. It was passed with a 19-16 vote. It was set up as a reconciliation bill to help pass the Senate. Not all Democrat senators were on board with this because of the $15 an hour minimum wage request increase. It was actually passed on February 26th, 2021 by a 219 to 212 vote. Therefore, it was passed to the Senate. The Senate made some changes, right? So remember, a bill that goes through the House has to be exact through the Senate. And if the Senate changes it, the House has to agree. Lawmakers made changes. They wanted to narrow eligibility for the stimulus checks. They wanted to trim unemployment benefits, and they wanted to nix the $15 hour minimum wage. The Senate passed this on March 6, 2021 by party line vote of 50 to 49. Senator Sullivan from Alaska was not there due to a family emergency, but if he would have voted no, obviously Vice President Harris would have came in and cast the deciding vote, and she would have caucused with the Democrats. But since the Senate changed the bill, it had to go back to the House. So that House eliminated the $15 out of an hour minimum wage, and they voted 2020 to 211 to approve the measure. One Democrat voted no, and this was passed on March 10th, and then President Biden signed it into law on March 11th. So I think this is a good example of some of the hiccups that Congress may have, and how there has to be some type of compromise and some type of reconciliation between the House and the Senate. Usually senators will have more formal powers than members of the House. They're elected to 6-year terms, and they represent a whole state, and they have the concept or the ability to advise and consent on presidential appointments. So they can confirm a presidential cabinet member or a Supreme Court justice. And usually they also have something called senatorial courtesy, meaning that if a member of the Senate is up for a cabinet position or some type of maybe even a Supreme Court justice seat, usually the senators will confirm them based off of that senatorial courtesy. It doesn't really happen often where it's not invoked, because I think some of these appointments are done strategically. There's the leadership. Go ahead and look at it. I have it on here. Here's the leadership in the House. The Speaker of the House is Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi. Then we have the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership. And this is the House. If we look at the Senate, Vice President Harris is the president of the Senate. We have Patrick Leahy, who is the president pro temp. So if the vice president is not at a congressional hearing or a congressional meeting, the president pro temp is in charge. So Mr. Senator Leahy would be the one to rule on procedure and rule on certain things in Congress. And here's the Democratic leadership. The Senate leader is, the majority leader is Chuck Schumer. And then if we go down to Republicans, the minority leader is Mitch McConnell. So these are the leaders in the Senate. The Speaker of the House, who is Nancy Pelosi, is elected by the majority party in the House. So the Democrats are the majority; they vote for the leader. They have the ability to put committee appointments together, and they refer bills to committee and appoint committees to happen, and they rule on matters of House procedure. And probably the most important thing is they're third in line for the presidency in the succession order. So if something would happen to President Biden and President Harris, then Nancy Pelosi would become president. And there's a succession line that happens after that. We also have floor leaders and whips. These are people that kind of go out and get their party members, kind of back certain things and try to really adhere to something called party discipline. They really don't have, formal authority, but they can influence legislation through persuasion. If any of you have watched House of Cards, the first season, Kevin Spacey's character was the Democratic whip. So what he would do is he would go around and try to get the Democrats to follow the party line and to not deviate from that, party discipline where you go outside of what the party wants. So very influential positions. We talked about the Senate leadership. We have the majority leader, the minority leaders. The vice president is the president of the Senate. They only can vote to break a tie. The president pro temp, elected by the majority party, presides in the absence of the vice president. So we have chairs and we have leadership acts. We talked about that. We have a lot of polarization on Capitol Hill. The Republicans are opposing government growth and spending more than ever. And the Democrats are more committed to federal government expansion than in previous years. So we talked about that. One of the checks that the Congress will have over the president, and this is something that we've seen a lot in the past couple of years, is the concept of impeachment. What will happen is the House of Representatives will charge the president with some type of crime that might involve treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. This is a very kind of open-ended definition of what you could be impeached on. And generally, impeachment movements in the U.S. have been developed on political grounds. And we've had 3 presidents impeached. None have been removed. So that's kind of a trick question. When you go up and take the exam, I'm going to ask you, how many presidents have been impeached and removed? The answer is going to be 0, right? We've had 3 presidents impeached, Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump twice. But they were issued articles of impeachment through the House. After that, it goes to the Senate, and the Senate will kind of act as the jury, right? And as part of that, they'll decide whether or not to remove a president. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get to the executive branch portion of this class. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at, the California legislature. We have the Assembly and the Senate here in California. We have 80 members of the Assembly and 40 members of the Senate here in California. Their bills are passed exactly the same way the U.S. Congress bills are passed. So our California legislature will pass bills exactly how the House and the Senate at the federal level will pass bills, right? So kind of the same process. But remember, their bills that they pass only affect California. Won't get too much into gerrymandering. We have had the census come out. California lost the seat, so our commission here is going to redevelop the lines that we have here, the legislative lines. We have a 14-member independent commission, and if you look at this link, it'll show you who are the people that are going to decide how our representatives districts are going to be held here in California. Since we lost one, so they're going to have to redistrict in the next couple of months. And there's just some information about it. They have to make a good faith effort and try to not do what's called gerrymandering, right? And gerrymandering is intentionally manipulating the boundaries to favor either an ethnic group, a political party, or a class. This comes from 1812 when Governor Gerry of Massachusetts redistricted an area in Massachusetts to benefit his Democratic Republican Party. It was said that the way the district was drawn, it looked like a salamander. So that's where we get the thing of gerrymandering and definition. So let's kind of flip over to history now, and we're going to talk about something called